Hello, my name is Catherine and I'm the Director within the Business of Data team here at Crinium, and it is a pleasure to have you joining us today. Driven by our global connected network, Crinium inspires data analytics senior leaders to drive efficiency and innovation and follow proven paths to success. The Business of Data show is just one of the formats that we showcase thought-leading insights from senior data analytics executives. In each episode, we'll discuss the latest industry news and research and explore the hottest topics, challenges and opportunities from around the world. On that note, we'd love to hear from you. If you have thoughts, questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please email them over to bod@criniumgroup.com. Has made an enormous positive impact on the worldwide response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Faced with global disruption, businesses had to respond quickly by altering their operations, transforming the delivery of their goods and services, and moving into a remote working model. All of this was facilitated by the cloud, and businesses who had already invested in the cloud were quick to reap the benefits. Of course, cloud transformation was already high on the agenda for many businesses, but the pandemic caused an extensive reorganization of priorities that altered transformation roadmaps and profoundly shifted the mindsets of business leaders. Now, many businesses are reaping the benefits of cloud-based operations like quick and effective scaling of data initiatives, reduced operational costs and platforms, and software offered as a service, amongst many others. Our first speaker joining me today in the studio is Harvinder Atwal, the Chief Data Science Officer for Money Supermarket. Welcome, Harvinder.
Hi, Catherine.
How are you doing? Good to see you again. How are you doing today?
I'm really well, thank you. Really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad we got you on to talk about the cloud. Now, I'm going to dive straight in with my first question here, Harvinder. Now, over the years, there's been some sort of debate, hasn't there, cloud versus on-prem, whereas now I think it's fairly clear that the future is certainly in the cloud. Now, what's this meant for you at Money Supermarket?
I guess we're actually a little bit more advanced in our use of cloud. We're actually onto the sort of second iteration. So we moved on to AWS pretty early on compared to a lot of organizations. I think it's back in sort of 2013, 2014. And we were starting to move a lot of our data infrastructure over at that time as well. But we have kind of since progressed And we're actually now more multi-cloud. So we still use AWS for sort of our services and front ends, but we're centralizing data onto GCP. So effectively, we're using the strength of each cloud. So AWS for the sort of maturity and breadth of features, and GCP for its sort of USP, which is around sort of managed services and analytics. So kind of what it's meant for us is really several things. So it helps break down the silos between teams. So instead of lots of teams using bespoke sort of on-prem services and software, people are working on more common platforms, which means that there's much more collaboration. And from a data team point of view, it makes data democratization much easier through allowing people access to more data through better tools. I guess one of the other big changes is it allows us to work faster on the things that actually benefit our customers. So rather than worrying about managing IT hardware and doing patching and upgrades and that sort of thing, we can really focus on what's going to actually make a difference to our customers and allow the cloud vendors to take care of the kind of the platforms themselves. And actually, talking about the debate between on-prem and cloud, a few years ago, a lot of hesitation was around things like security. But actually, we realized very early on that security on the cloud was always going to be better than security on platform. So when you're responsible for your own infrastructure and platforms, you have to worry about securing the hardware, patching the software, making sure it's up to date. And that is not always simple. But instead, we can rely on very large teams of cloud security engineers, Amazon and Google to kind of do that for us. So that makes a big difference. And then, the cloud's evolved. There's always more and more features in terms of access and control. So by having more users and more data on a single platform, it's actually easier to control. So we can use identity access management and access control policies to pretty much govern what people see, more importantly, what they don't see. We can scan the data to make sure there's no personal data. Disaster recovery is simpler. So for us, it's meant a lot of benefits, speed, collaboration, security, control. It's been a major step change in our capability.
Thank you so much. Now, everything you've mentioned there has been absolutely crucial, right? Over the last, beyond 12 months with the pandemic, so many organizations have needed those exact things that you've been able to really capitalize on, being able to collaborate effectively with your team, and of course, security being front of mind for so many organizations. So that having that hindsight behind, really leaning into the cloud so early on, compared to many organizations that we speak to, has clearly really benefited you. Now, one of the things that comes up in a lot of our conversations that we have here on the business of data is about budgets, about return of investment. Now, I know you've mentioned there a few of the key things that you're able to do due to being in that second iteration of the cloud. But if it was the fact that you were sat across from another thought leader today who was, still on the fence about going completely into the cloud, what would be your thoughts on regards to return of investment and budget, and how would you communicate that?
Yeah, so a lot of people kind of want to move on to the cloud because they think it's going to be cheaper, but actually that shouldn't really be the motivating driver, because I think once people are on the cloud, they realize that there's a lot more capability there, so they end up using more services than they would have done if they were operating sort of in a either on-prem or hybrid capacity. So cost is definitely important, especially in the current economic environment. And we certainly shouldn't have wasteful processes. So, there's lots of controls you can put in place. So, for example, we set quotas. So within Google Cloud Platform, there's a concept of projects. So projects will have quotas for cost and usage. And you'll have monitoring and alerting. So once you hit certain thresholds, it will fire off alerting emails to stakeholders so they can try and manage those costs. We kind of have a fixed budget and we have a total level alerting around that. And if, it does appear that certain processes are expensive, we will ask the users to kind of like go back and refactor their jobs. And that was quite common when we initially moved to GCP. People just were, for the first time, moving from an environment where they were being constrained in terms of capacity. So you would write queries, they'd get queued up, they'd run slowly, to a world where it's a lot more unconstrained. You can just go into a console or the command line, just create a server or just run a very large query, and it will run very, very quickly. But obviously that racks up in terms of cost. So initially there was a lot of giving users feedback that actually there was a way that they could do what they wanted, but do it more cheaply. So we definitely have all that in place, and then more strategically, you can architect for cost upfront. So for example, when you start using some of the managed services like Google Kubernetes Engine, BigQuery, they will scale automatically. So if you have a big job or a large load, they will scale, but then they'll also scale back down. So it's important to also architect with cost in mind, if that's a focus, and it always should be. There are other things that you can do in terms of architecting, so putting lifecycle policies in place around data and resources. So they get to a certain point and data will be deleted or the resources will be shut down automatically. There's a lot of monitoring that you can put in place, obviously, on a day-to-day level, but we also segregate our projects. So some are central, like central data warehouses. They serve a lot of users, use lots of use cases, but then some are kind of bespoke to domains and teams. And therefore, it's very simple in those cases to align that cost with the benefit that team creates, and you can start understanding ROI better. But generally, I'd say make sure you have a kind of like low level, good oversight and observability around costs and the monitoring in place. Make sure you strategically think about the architecture. So make sure it's going to be cost effective. Look very carefully at the pricing models of the cloud vendors. They can be quite complex, so make sure you do some analysis around that to make sure that, for example, you could be paying on a sort of pay-as-you-go basis, but actually it could be cheaper if you actually pay upfront for reserve capacity, for example. But ultimately, I would say don't be too constrained and don't get too hung up about costs. They certainly weren't necessarily the main driver of our move to the cloud. Remember, in a data center on-prem world, there are lots of hidden costs. So things like cost of delay. So move to cloud will give you more benefits. Hopefully people should be more productive. There should obviously be benefit to the organization from doing that. So always make sure you weigh that against the cost that you incur.
Brilliant, Harvinder, absolutely brilliant. I absolutely love it when I have a guest who joins me on the show that just gives such practical tips and insight. I know there's going to be lots of people watching this episode today writing down all of these practical takeaways, so thank you so much for that. Now, just before we leave you today, Harvinder, something I did want to ask you. Now, here in the UK, obviously we've been in and out of lockdowns, hopefully out for the last time, and I know you mentioned a few things at the top of our conversation today about what the cloud has enabled you to do. But what about looking for the future? How is the cloud going to enable you to work in a remote fashion, in a hybrid fashion, in an in-person fashion? How are you looking to have the cloud support you in what we, at the present, we don't know what it's going to look like quite yet?
Yeah, so I guess as an organization, we're pretty lucky. We're pretty well set up already to work in a remote way. We already had flexible working. So people were able to transition to remote working quite easily. With the cloud, obviously, you're accessing from a local machine, but the work is actually happening in the cloud. So that makes it very easy to work remotely for sustained periods of time from anywhere in the world. You just need access. You need security around that access, obviously. We use Okta VPN, IP restrictions, usual sort of standard stuff to make sure that the access is secure. But once that is set up, we're able to do our work anywhere. So for us, it gives us freedom and flexibility to be very much more adaptive. We don't need people going into data centers to reboot machines or upgrade hardware or anything like that. So definitely a lot of flexibility from working in the cloud.
Brilliant. Harvinder, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
There we go. What a brilliant episode. Thank you again to our thought leaders for their fantastic contributions. Next time, we'll be talking all about edge computing. Just as we have done this time, we'll be joined by expert thought leaders to help us dive deep into the challenges and opportunities. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Data YouTube channel, follow our page on LinkedIn, and visit our content platform for more great content, insights, and connections. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next time.